So welcome back to the Floriani Software Fundamentals video series on FTCU. My name is Mark Garetz and I'm a National Floriani educator. And in this section we're going to be covering some of the advanced design editing features and tools in the software that we haven't covered in the previous sections. So in our previous sections we have covered the main editing tools and a lot of the layout tools, and we've also covered Save to Sew, which can definitely adjust your design in some very important ways. But sometimes with a design, you just want to be able to do more with it. You want to be able to tweak it a little bit, and you need to do some advanced editing on it. And that's what we're going to be covering in this section. So to do that, we're going to bring our friend the cherub in again. So I'm going to bring him in, and I know you're probably getting tired of the cherub by now, but you all have it so you can repeat these exercises. So I'm going to do ungroup, and I am going to click off of the cherub. And one of the things I want to talk about when you're adjusting designs, and we've touched on this before, is your ability to change the stitch parameters of what's going on, say with these fills or these satins or whatever. And then you also have the ability to edit them using our outline editing tools, primarily the shape tool over here that we have also talked about. So theoretically you should know how to use all those, but I just want to put it in perspective for you here in this section so you could see some of the things that you might do. So we know that if we select, for example, the end of this cherub, we could change the fill type, we could change the fill parameters, whatever we wanted to do with it, and you know how to do that over here. But what if we wanted to change it to a different type of stitching? So for example, right now this is a fill. What if we wanted this to be an applique, right, instead of a fill? Now in this particular design, I'm going to click off it again. We have some stitches that run around the edge already that would work as our finishing stitch for this particular applique. So we don't need to re-put those in, and we're going to show you with the applique tool just how easy it is to leave these in and just replace these stitches with fabric. And to show you that, I'm going to reselect it. Now before I do that, look right in here and you will see that when I select it, this fill actually is pretty big. Now we could go ahead and leave this like this. If this were just a big piece of fabric, it would work just like the fill and the rest of the stitches would cover it and it would still look just fine. So we could actually just switch this to an applique and it would be fine. But just as an exercise, let's assume that we want to fix some of these edges over here so they fit a little bit better. And the way we do that is we edit this shape with our shape tool. So in the past we have been editing artwork because it was easy to show you, but any stitch object like a satin stitch, a run stitch, or a fill stitch in the software, as long as it's been created in the software or it's been converted into outlines by the software, it has those vectors or nodes or points underneath it that are always there so that we can use it to adjust it. So if I come over here to select my shape tool, you will see that now I've got my blue nodes, my angle line, my start and stop points. So I can adjust whatever I need to with this. So what we're going to do is we're going to move these nodes over a little bit. So I'm just going to click on it and drag it over. All right, so I'm just going to click and drag it in, and I'm going to right click to lock those in. And let me click off of it here in normal select mode so we can see if I moved it in enough. That's probably good enough for over there. Let's reselect it. Actually, let me move this edge in just a little bit. I'm going to show you another trick here. So I'm going to move these 2 points in, and in order to do that, I'm going to move them in together so I don't have to do them individually. So I'm going to select the first one, and you know what? This little handle right here is hiding the second one, but I can see it because remember when I put my cursor over a node or point, I get that little blue icon that shows up underneath it to tell me that if I click now, I'm actually going to select that point rather than the handle. So what I'm going to do is hold down Control, because remember that does a multiple select. I'm going to hold down Control and you can see my cursor gets a little plus by it. If I click now, you'll see that I have both of those points selected. So now if I just click and drag them over, they will drag together. See that? All right, so I brought them in, and now I just want to do this one a little bit. So I'm just going to single click on this one. Let me click off it to lock that in. And I'm going to need to reselect it here. Hold on. Go back to shape mode. In fact, I can do it right here. I don't have to come all the way up here. These shortcuts are new, so I'm just not really that used to them yet. Let me just bring that one in a little bit, and I'm going to right click again to lock that in. Now this edge right here, it's a little bit out compared to this satin stitch, so I'm a little worried that this fabric might peek out. Now in reality, this fill stitch, if we didn't change it, it would cover it, so it would be no big deal because this is going to go down first. But let's just assume I want to move this curve over. I would do the same thing that I did before. I'm going to hold down Control, and I'm going to select all the points of that curve. Right, and finally this one. And I'm just going to move it all in a little bit and let off and right click. And now I've got my piece a little bit better. So that fits pretty good. I might want to adjust this one right here. So let me just actually slide that one down a little bit. And we'll move this point in a little bit. And this shows you that you can adjust these shapes when you need to. Now let's reselect it in normal select mode, and let's watch what happens when I convert this into an applique. So if you remember, I have my one clicks down here, my stitch styles. So I'm going to change the stitch style of this from a fill into an applique by clicking my applique button. And when I do that, of course, it's going to put in the default satin stitch for that applique, which I don't need anymore. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here, and that's the finishing stitch. So I'm just going to uncheck it and reapply it. And now my finishing stitch will go away, but you can see here that I have placement and tack down lines for my fabric. So if I was doing this the traditional way, I could stitch this out, and if I look here in my sequence view, this is going to stitch out down here pretty close to the top of my peach pearl. But if I want this applique piece to stitch out first, remember that I can click and drag it up to the top and let off, and now my applique is going to stitch out very first thing, which is probably what I want to do. So I want all the rest of these stitches to come on top of it. So now what I would get is I would get a placement line, my machine would stop, I would get a tack, I put down my fabric and I would trim it, and then I would stitch my tack down line, and then the rest of the design would stitch, and my applique would be in there. And remember, if I want to preview my fabric, I can click this button, and if I wanted to get something that looked kind of pink, like this pink velvet, and put that in there, I would have that fabric in there. Now you can see that it's got some stitches on top here, so I need to figure out what those are, because if those stitch on top, then it's going to ruin my applique. So I can see over here in my sequence view that it's these stitches right here. All right, and part of that is the underlay for these. Now they're very small, so I probably can delete this whole line of stitches and it will be fine. So I've also got a lock stitch here, so I'm going to hold down Control. I don't want to get rid of this fill, so I'm going to just press the delete key on my keyboard to see how this is looking now. And I've got one more line of stitches here that really needs to be deleted. Now I want to see what that line of stitches does. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my slow redraw tool to figure out what that does. So there's my applique, and that's actually a fill. And then I've got this little run that goes over here that, you know what, I don't really need that little run stitch anymore. And it doesn't connect to anything. It doesn't do anything important. So, and I can see right here that this is it, because I can see this little pattern. I can notice this. So I can just actually click this, and I can press delete on my keyboard. And now I've cleaned up that design so that my applique won't have any stitches on the top of it. So that is modifying the stitch parameters and modifying the stitch types as one particular way to do some advanced editing on a design. Now, this technique of replacing a fill with an applique, That's really useful as your design gets really big, because at some point you're just going to have too many stitches. And by replacing big, large fills with appliques, that is a great way to reduce the stitch count and make your design stitch out better, and also give it some interesting textures. Now I'm going to get a new design window. So we have a new fresh design window to work with. And I'm going to bring in another design. And this time I'm going to go to my design library. I'm going to go to my April 2010 folder here, look at my designs that are in it. And I'm going to use this Easter butterflies design here to show you some other things. And remember that this is going to come in grouped. So I am going to select it. And then I am going to ungroup it so we can work with pieces and parts of it. Now, oftentimes when you load in a design, you load it in and you decide that you don't like part of it, so you just want to eliminate it. Or you want to reuse a piece of a design somewhere else. So what if we wanted to either eliminate or reuse this butterfly here, this pink butterfly, just somewhere else, or we just wanted to stitch it out by itself? Well, the first thing we need to do is select it. And in this case, it's actually isolated enough to where I could actually, if I was very careful, drag a normal selection box around it to select it. But a better option is to use my lasso tool. So I'm just going to use my lasso tool and I'm going to click around it. And I am going to click straight through that leaf because I know I haven't surrounded the leaf. And when I can see a clear path to my beginning, I'm going to right click to select that butterfly. Now, if I wanted to reuse it all by itself, what I would do is I would copy it, get a new design window, and paste it, and then I would simply save it as its own file. Remember, I'd probably want to save it as a WAF file, and then I would maybe run it through Save to Sew, or certainly convert it to my machine format when I was ready to stitch it out. Now I'm going to go back to the original design, and that butterfly is still there. And what I'm going to show you now is what if I wanted to do multiple butterflies. Now we covered this tool before, the duplicate tool, but I'm going to show it to you real quickly one more time. So I'm going to click the duplicate tool, and now I'm going to put in more butterflies here. So I'm going to put in one there and one there, and I'm going to put in one here, and that ought to do it. And now I've got a brand new layout based on the original design that originally only had one pink butterfly, and now it's got 4 pink butterflies. Now the tool that I want to go into a little more detail on right now is one that we have looked at a little bit and we've used a little bit, and that's the slow redraw tool up here. So let me go back to normal select mode, and this is our slow redraw tool right here, and this is the icon that basically turns it on and off. Now by default, it's here all the time. If you would prefer not to see it, if you want just a little bit more screen real estate, you can turn that off, but I just usually leave mine on all the time. So this toggles the slow redraw on and off. It doesn't go back and forth between slow redrawing and not slow redrawing. You get out of slow redrawing by selecting your normal select tool. But let's take a look at the controls we have here. So first of all, we have our color sequence bar, and this shows you the colors in the exact order that they are going to stitch out. And so you can get a visual reference here of how this design is going to stitch out and how the colors are going to change from color to color. This little control right here and this little control right here, these allow you to slow redraw or stitch simulate one stitch at a time. So by clicking this one, you can go forward a stitch. Clicking this one here, you can go backwards a stitch. This one over here, these are our controls that let us play this stitch out like it was a VCR. Of course, VCRs don't exist anymore, so maybe a DVR now, but you can play it. So let me just click it to play forward, and you can see it starting to stitch out there along the bottom. And if I would like to make it stitch faster, I can move this speed slider over all the way over to the right, and now you can see that it's stitching faster. And if I move it all the way over to the left, you can see that it is stitching slower. And if I want to stitch backwards, I can click the backwards button, and now you can see it's stitching backwards. So I can pause it and start stitching forward again and adjust my speed. So this tool is really, really useful for watching how your design is going to stitch out. So I always like to do this before I finalize a design and take it over to my machine and do a test stitch out, because this is going to highlight a lot of the stitching problems before I even waste time stitching and waste thread and material and things. So I really like the slow redraw tool. When you're a beginning digitizer or beginning embroiderer, this is also a great tool to see how a digitizer did things. So you can watch how they path the design, how they put the underlay in, and you can see all of the various tricks that the digitizers use. So let me just stop it here for a second, and I'm going to stitch backwards. And we're going to go back to this leaf here, and I'm going to stop and go forwards, and I'm going to play forwards just a little bit, and I'm going to stop and go back, and I want you to see how that leaf stitches. All right, so I'm going to go forward again. You'll watch. I'm going to tell you what happens, because it happens pretty fast. In fact, let me slow it down. Okay, that's a good thing, what our speed control's for. So when I play it, this leaf that's down in here, it is going to run out to the edge. So he's going to put a run stitch in that goes out to the edge, and then start stitching that satin stitch for the leaf and come back, so he's back into the main body of the design, and he doesn't have to trim. What you might want to do as a beginning digitizer is you might have wanted to stitch here, and then when you got out here, you'd be kind of in a box. So you'd have to trim to get back into the design. So by running out to the edge and stitching back, you can avoid that trim. So watch what happens. Runs out to the edge and stitches the satin stitch all the way back to the middle. So the point is not to teach you how to do that, but the point is that by watching how a design stitches, you can get a really good lesson in digitizing, assuming that the design is digitized correctly. Now, I'm going to put my speed back to regular. Now, if I were to sit here and watch this whole thing stitch out, even at fast speed, that's way too slow for me. So what I love about the slow redraw tool is this slider right here. And this slider lets me scroll along the stitch sequence and stitch at any speed I want, as slow or as fast as I drag. So if I want to drag it really fast, I can. So I can get all the way to the end and go all the way backwards, etc. Now technically this is called scrubbing, but you can just think of it as sliding along the design, right? So the reason I wanted to show you the slow redraw was because of how useful it is, but I also want to show you what problems we've created in this design now. So we're going to stitch it out now, and I'm going to move this design along, and you can see I'm stitching out a green, and then I'm stitching out a little bit darker green, then an even darker green, then a little bit of light yellow, then some white, and a little bit of gray, and some brighter yellow, and a brown, and a dark brown, and a darker brown. And now I'm going to stitch out a light pink, and a medium pink, and a dark pink, and a brown, and then a light pink, and a medium pink, and a dark pink, and a brown, etc. So you can see that I am stitching out this butterfly completely 4 different times. So this means that there's a lot of thread changes here that really are not necessary. And you can see here that this says I have 26 colors. Now I really do not have 26 colors. If you look down here in my stitching sequence for my threads, I really only have 14 colors. So that means 12 of these thread changes are repeated colors. So I could, over here in my sequence view, fix that by dragging and dropping all these colors around, but I have a tool that allows us to do that automatically. If I go back to normal select mode, it's this tool right here, and we call it color sort. And what color sort does is it's going to take a look at all of the colors in this design, and it is going to put all the like colors together. So it stitches out more efficiently. So watch what happens when I click the color sort tool. If I click it, it's going to think for a little while, and it says, look, it reduced it by 12 colors. So if I click OK, now when I stitch this out, I'm going to stitch through all of the base parts on the first butterfly, but now I'm going to stitch all of the pinks, and all of the dark pinks and all of the darker pinks and then all of the browns. And this will have stitched out much, much more efficiently. Now, the last thing I want to tell you about color sorting is that oftentimes a designer will repeat colors on purpose because the colors are layered. And if a color sort tool just blindly put all of, say, the light pinks together, and there was a need to have a light pink on top of a dark pink, and it put all the light pinks together, then that extra little pink on top would be hidden and it wouldn't stitch out or look correctly. So our color sort tool is intelligent, so it knows about the layers in a design. So to demonstrate that for you, I'm going to grab this butterfly right here, and I'm going to move him over so he's just a little bit on top of that butterfly over there. Now, if I were to color sort this with a color sort tool that didn't know about layers, it would mess this up. But watch what happens when we color sort it with our color sort tool. I'm going to click it. Instead of reducing 12 colors, it's only reduced 8 colors. Why? Because it's going to stitch out all of these pinks and all of these dark pinks, and then when it gets done with all 3 of these butterflies, then it's going to come in and stitch this butterfly. So watch what happens when I slow redraw it. Okay, actually this is a pretty fast redraw. Okay, so you can see that it stitched it out in a better sequence. Okay, so it stitched all the light pinks together. Now you notice that it put all the light pinks together, right? And then it put all of the dark pinks, but it didn't do quite all of them. You see this part right here? It didn't overstitch that part. And we go through, you'll see that it finally overstitches those last parts last. So it's a very, very intelligent color sort tool, and it's a very, very useful tool. Now the next thing I want to show you is the next logical thing that you might want to do, and that is to optimize your sewing sequence. So to do that, I'm going to switch over to this design window over here where I've already put in 3 of our butterflies. And the way I put them in is I put this one in first, and then this one in second, and then this one in third. So if I just stitch this out the way it is now, it's going to stitch out butterfly number 1, butterfly number 2, and butterfly number 3 in the middle. So the first thing I want to do is obviously I want to optimize the color sequence of the color sorting. So I'm going to color sort this design. Okay, so now took out 8 color stops, and you can see that all the pinks stitch together, all the dark pinks, etc., just like we did before. But what I really want to do is I probably want to stitch this one and then this one and then this one, rather than jump all the way over here and then all the way back to here every time. So luckily I have a tool to do that, and I'm going to select all my butterflies, and that tool is this one right here, which is to optimize our sewing sequence. So if I click that, it's going to calculate for a bit, and it's going to optimize our sewing sequence. So now watch what happens when I slow redraw this. It's going to stitch out butterfly number 1. Instead of jumping all the way over to the left, it's going to stitch out the one in the middle, etc. And then it's going to repeat those colors. Okay, so sequencing the design does not mess with your color sequence, but within a particular color, it tries to optimize that design sewing order. So we've covered how to optimize the sewing sequence by color sorting your design and then optimizing the actual sewing sequence of the elements. There's one more piece to the puzzle, and that is optimizing where each element starts and stops with relation to the one next to it. And that is called optimize entry exit points, or start and stop points, and that icon's right here. It's not lit up right now because I don't have anything selected. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select this first triangle, and I've created these triangles so that we can see how this works. And I'm going to select it in shape mode so that you can see my start and stop points. Now here's my start point, here's my stop point. If I wanted to do this manually, I could start here, I could drag my stop point over here, and visually I can see that probably want my start point of this one to be down here, and I could just repeat that. So you certainly can do it manually if you prefer, but our tool that I'm going to show you now will do this for you automatically. So let's just take a look at where our start and stop points are on these, and they're approximately in the same place. So what I'm going to do is I am going to select them all by dragging a box around them, and I'm going to invoke my Optimize Entry Exit tool. So when I do that, now watch what happens. Unfortunately, I can't use shape mode on multiple selected objects. So I'm going to show you this one. So you can see now it's starting here and stopping here. And this one will start here and stop here. And this one will do the same. Start here. And actually, it didn't stop over here because there's nothing over here. So it just left that alone. If I wanted to move it manually over here or stop someplace else, I could. Now, let me select this middle triangle. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to flip it vertically so that now my start and stop points don't make any sense. So this one would now stop here and it would come all the way up here and start here, which is a really, really long jump. So let me select them all again, and I will re-optimize my start and stop points. And now when we look at them in shape mode, select one, go to shape mode, you'll see that now my start point is here, but my stop point is here. And theoretically, if this worked right, it should draw a straight line over to here. The closest possible connect point between these two is right across here. So if I select that one, let's take a look. Yep, it drew a straight line across there. And then this one should do a very similar thing coming back to this one. Now put the stop point up here. So let's see what this did. Yes, my start point is right here, which is the closest point to here. So you can see that it optimized the start and stop entry exit points between all of these three elements. So I've just done something simple here. If you want to do it to your whole design, of course, whatever you select, it's going to optimize the start and stop points. Now, if you would like to do all three of these things, so you want to invoke our entire set of 3 sequence and color sorting optimize tools, the proper order to do this in is to first do your color sorting, then do your optimize of your sequence, and then finally do your start and stop point optimization. So again, you would do color sort first, followed by your sequence, and then your optimize entry exits. So one of the most requested functions in FTCU is the ability to remove overlapping stitches, because the problem with a lot of designs out there is that they have a lot of layers of stitches on top of stitches on top of stitches, and that creates a design that's overly dense and causes stitching problems. But there are definitely times when you want to remove as many overlapping stitches as you can, and there are times when you just want to leave it alone. So how do you decide when to do that? So one of our other guest educators, Trevor Conquergood, has a rule he calls the rule of thumb. And that rule is that if the stitches that are on top of another set of stitches is the size of or smaller than the size of your thumb, you want to leave those stitches alone. So you don't want to remove any stitches underneath. And if it's bigger than that, then you might want to take a look at removing the overlapping stitches. Now when he says the size of your thumb, he means the stitch area. So I've got a couple of A's on here, and if I select my first filled in A here, and we go over to our properties box to look at the size of it in the transform tab, you'll see that it's about 1.8 inches high. Now the area of your thumb is about 1 inch by 1 inch, so that's the kind of area that we are talking about that you would want to not mess with removing overlapping stitches. So in other words, if the area is smaller or equal to 1 inch by 1 inch, then you want to leave it alone. So this is 1.8 by 1.66. So you might think, well, I want to remove those overlapping stitches. The answer would be no, because we are not talking about the actual area of the whole object. We're talking about the area where the stitches fall. And if we were to measure across here, you'd find that this is not even 1/4 inch wide. So we would want to leave this alone. So we would want this A to stitch out on top. And definitely when you're talking about trying to remove stitches underneath run stitches like this, you definitely never ever want to try to do that. So I just want to show you an example of why that is a problem, because especially beginning embroiderers want to remove as many of the overlapping stitches as possible, but you get into trouble when you do that. So I have got this A on top of this big blue fill here, and to remove the overlapping stitches, what you do is you right click on the object that's on top and you select remove overlap stitches from the menu. I'll show you that in a second. Before we do that, let's take a look up here. This total design has 24,675 stitches in it. If I right click on this and I say remove overlapping stitches, first thing that comes up, it's going to ask me for an allowed overlap distance. This is the amount of overlap that it's going to leave underneath. And remember, we want our elements to overlap a little bit because of push and pull, so they don't pull apart when they stitch. And 0.5 millimeter is the default. I like to use a little bit more than that. I like to use about 0.8 to 1. So we'll go ahead and set it to 0.8. And I'm going to click OK to do that. And it's going to calculate, and it's going to take those stitches out from underneath. So I've just created a hole underneath this A. And I know that you can't see it, but in order to show it to you, I'm actually going to come over and hide all of my yellow thread so you can see that there's a hole in there now. Now I'm going to turn my yellow thread back on because I want you to look up here at my stitch count. My stitches went up from 24,675 to 24,819. So I didn't take stitches away when I did this. I actually added more stitches to the design by taking out the stitches underneath the A. And why is that? Because this fill now has to stitch around the shape of that hole, and it actually takes more stitches to do that. So if I undo that, you'll see here again we've got 24,675. If I redo the hole, I went up to 24,819. So I actually added several hundred stitches to this design when I was trying to get rid of extra stitches. So I'm going to undo the fact that I made a hole in my A. Now I'm going to select that run stitch, and I'll show you that if you wanted to do this, you could remove the overlap stitches here. I'll go ahead and leave it at 0.5 millimeter. Let's watch what happens. We're at 2465. If I click OK, it will take them out. You can really already see all the problems that that's going to create. And I went up to 25,752, added a whole lot more stitches just to get rid of what was underneath that run stitch. So that's not a good thing. Now, what if I wanted to do it under this element? Now, this is definitely a candidate because remember we're at 2465. If I say remove overlap stitches, and I go up to my default of 0.8 and I say OK. And now I've actually gone down. I went from, if I undo it, 24,675. Now I've actually made a positive impact on this design because this was nice and dense over something that was nice and dense, and I got rid of let's see, how many did I get rid of? I got rid of over 1,000 stitches here. So I actually made a positive impact by removing the overlaps there. But that's, in a nutshell, how you remove overlaps and why you would want to sometimes and why you don't want to other times. Now there are times that we want to make stitches that go around an object, or we want something to border an object, or for other special effects, we need to create an outline around an object or set of embroidery objects that are already in our design. Now, if we've created the design and it's simple, like a triangle or a rectangle or something that we drew, it's easy to create that outline because the object itself has an outline. We can just copy and paste it and convert that copy into another set of stitches. So to show you what I'm talking about, let me get a rectangle here. We'll just do this very, very quickly. If I wanted to make this into a fill stitch, for example, and then I wanted to make a satin stitch border that ran around the outside, then that would be a steel stitch. And if I convert this into a steel by doing my one-click steel, my fill goes away. So if I undo that and I were to select this set of stitches and I were to make a copy of it. So I'm going to do a copy and a paste, and I want to do that up here because when I do it up here, they come in directly aligned on top of each other, and this is an instance where this is good. I've got my second fill here. I can convert directly into a run stitch if I wanted that to be an outline run around the outside, or a steel stitch if I wanted to do that. And if I click off it, and they're all the same color, so let me just make that steel a different color. And you can see now I've got that satin stitch, steel stitch running around the outside. So again, if I've got an object like that that's already got an outline, and it's not a complex object like this cherub that has multiple outlines, then just using the object itself to create a nice outline that hugs it is the best way to do it. But there's often times when we have a complex object, and I'm going to get rid of that, like this cherub, for example, where we want to create an outline around it. So that's a little bit more difficult to do with the conversion tool that we just looked at. So instead, what we want to do is use a tool that we have right here that allows us to create outlines. So I'm going to click on the cherub because the cherub is already a group. And you don't have to necessarily group something to outline a group of objects, but they do all need to be selected so the software knows what you want to work with. And then you can click the Create Outlines. So again, if I click off it, you can see that's grayed out. I can't use it. If I click on this, it's lit up. If I click the Create Outlines tool, it comes up with the default number of what we call ripples, which is 5. So I'm going to leave it there, and it's a spacing of 0.18, so a little over 1/10 of an inch. And if this was in millimeters, I'd see this in millimeters. And I'm just going to leave it as cascade, and I'm going to not worry about join, repeats, or remove selection. So if I click OK now, I just want to show you what's going to happen. It is going to think about it, and it's going to create a set of artwork lines. And let me change the color of those so they're a little bit easier to see. Oops, I just changed the color of my whole design. That was not a smart thing to do. I'm going to undo it. Good thing we have an undo button. So I'm going to scroll down in my sequence view to the very last item, which was the outlines that I created, and I'm going to darken those up so you can see them. Let me just pick that dark purple there, and now you can see them. So what I've created is a set of 5 outlines that go around that design, and as the outlines get further and further away, they get smoother and smoother. And so you can change the number of ripples, or you can do something that's not a set of ripples at all, but is instead a spiral. So I'm actually going to delete that outline, and we will recreate a new outline, and I'm going to change to spiral and click OK, and you'll see that you get a different effect. All right, and let me go down and reselect those to make them a color that you can see a little easier. And you can see now that I've got something that starts here and contiguously stitches all the way around. So instead of having an outline, an outline, an outline, an outline, it's going to be a spiral. Now what I have created here is actually artwork, so you need to remember that this is artwork, and you'll need to convert it into stitches should you want to stitch these lines. Now I'm going to undo that, and I am going to reselect my cherub one more time. Oops, I've undo too far. Let me just drag a box around that and delete it. All right, so I've got my cherub selected, and I'm going to go back to my Create Outlines tool. This time I am going to reduce my number of ripples to 1, and I'm going to make sure that I am in cascade mode because I want an outline that just goes around the edge. And I'm going to go ahead and leave my spacing there, and I'm going to click OK. And now what I've got, let me come down and rechange that color one more time so that you can see it. I've got an artwork outline that goes around my cherub. So if I wanted to make this a run stitch, I'd come down here and click my run stitch style selector, and I would change that into a run stitch. Now what is this actually good for? Well, you can do all kinds of special effects for it, but most often what we're going to use this for is to cut out a hole in something in the shape of this cherub. Now I could use remove overlapping stitches, but a better way to do it is to use my combine tool like we learned earlier to cut that hole. So if I wanted to create, say, a trapunto effect around this cherub, or a border effect or something special, I would have a bigger box, and let me draw that actually. So I'll get my rectangle tool and I will draw a bigger box around it. Okay, and now what I need to do to use my combine tool is I need to select both pieces of artwork. So they're both right here at the bottom, so I've selected them with my top level. And now if I click my combine tool, what's going to happen is now I have a combined piece of artwork that has a hole in it in the shape of that cherub with a little bit of an offset. If I didn't want an offset, I would set it to 0. But watch what happens when I fill it. So let's just use a motif fill. And it's going to put in my default motif. And we can go ahead and leave that there. If I click off it, you'll see that now I've got this motif stitch that goes around the edge, but it doesn't go through my design. So I could use this to create a trapunto effect or whatever other kind of special effect I want. So that is the Create Outlines tool. Now, one more thing I want to show you. Let me reselect the cherub, and I'll go back to my Create Outlines tool. And that is that if I have join repeats, it'll put a little stitch between them. You probably want to leave that alone. And then remove selection actually removes what it outlined. So if I were to repeat this and click remove selection, you'll see that it will remove my cherub, which sometimes is what you want, sometimes you don't. So just be mindful of that. But typically when I use this tool, I don't use remove selection or join repeats, and usually I'm using it in Cascade unless I need to use spiral for a particular special effect that I want to do. So that is the Create Outlines tool. The last topic I want to cover in this section on advanced editing has to do with your design colors. Now, we learned much earlier on how you can go in and individually change thread colors and reassign colors in the design, etc., match them to different color palettes and things. But what I'm talking about now is the fact that maybe you have this design here of this branch and these leaves, and you like the design, but you just don't like the way the colors look. And you could go in and you could change the colors, and you could do this manually, but what if you want a little bit of automated help? Or what if you don't like it, but you don't know what you want to change it to, so you need some inspiration? And that tool that helps you do that is this one right here, and it's called Color Play. And Color Play is a tool that allows you to manipulate these colors in an automatic way. So let me just invoke it, and when you click it, you are going to get the design up in a little window here, and it's going to show you all the colors that are in the design. And you have some buttons over here that allow you to lighten up the design, darken up the design, tint it, or randomize it, or select a color theme. And then over here we have 3D view, so you can turn 3D on or 3D off. We're going to leave it off for this example here because the colors show up a little bit better at the smaller size. So let's just take, for example, the fact that we like this, but it's too pastel for our taste, so we want to darken it up. We can just come up here and click darken, and it'll make them darker shades of the same type of color. And we keep clicking darken until we get it the way we want. If we decide we don't like it, we can lighten it up some, and we can go all the way back to where it was the original. And if I get, say, way out here and I just want to go back to the original without going back all the time, I can click the reset button down here and it goes back to the way the original was. So that's what the lighten and darken buttons do. I'm going to come down here to the randomize button because it's kind of fun. So if I click it and keep clicking it, you'll see that I get a random selection of colors there. All right, so that's kind of cool. I'm going to reset. I could also step back in the history if I said, well, you know, I like that one, or, you know, maybe I like the one ahead a little bit better. So you can step forwards and backwards with these buttons right here, but I'm actually going to reset it. Because what if we wanted to randomize this, but you know what? We didn't want to randomize the color of the branch or the veins of the leaves. We wanted to leave those alone. So I can tell over here in my sequence view that walnut taffy is one of the colors, and I also know that Irish green, scorching pink, and wine are the other colors that make up the branch and the veins of the leaves. So if I don't want those to be affected by this, I can uncheck them. So I'm going to uncheck walnut taffy. I'm going to uncheck Irish green. I'm going to uncheck scorching pink and wine. And now the only thing that will be affected is the leaves. So watch what happens when I randomize. I'm only randomizing the colors of the leaves, but not the veins. Okay, and I will reset it. When I do that, I reset my selection here. So I'm going to uncheck those one more time, because what I want to do is show you now the tints and the themes. So tints bring up a color palette, and you can select a starting color here. So you can get just about any color you want here. If you wanted to, you could actually type in RGB values or hue, saturation, and luminance values here, and it would show you the color here, and then it will come over here into custom colors if you click add to custom colors, or you can pick any of these colors that are here in the basic colors palette. So let's just pick, I don't know, basic green, and we'll say okay, and it will tint all of those in those shades of green. And if I do that again, I could maybe pick a red and say okay, and now my leaves are in shades of red, but again, I did not affect my stem and my veins of the leaves. And I can do the same thing with themes. Themes are pre-assigned sets of colors, and usually you can tell what they are because it says. So for example, if I want to go to gold 1, I could click OK, and it would assign that set in there. If I wanted to choose, say, a Christmas set, I think I have that in here. It's not alphabetical, I apologize. There it is, Christmas 1, and say OK, and now I've got, I don't know, some golds in there or whatever. Let me reset it, and we'll pick a different theme, and this will do everything. Let's do pink 1, say OK, and now it's all in shades of pink. So this is what color play does, and it's very, very useful for getting ideas about how you might want to recolor a design. So a couple of other things I want to talk about as relates to color play, and one is that it only works with Floriani threads. And what I mean by that is when you start to actually do your effects, as you start to convert from the base colors into these color themes or tints or whatever, it is only going to convert into Floriani threads, because that's where we know the most information about what goes together and everything, and because that's where we know the most information about what colors go together. So I'm going to actually cancel this, and I'm going to go over to another design window, because I'm going to show you another cool thing that you can do with color play. And we've often been requested to be able to click a button and convert all of a design's colors that aren't Floriani into Floriani colors. So now this doesn't go from any palette to any palette, but if you want to go quickly from, say, all of these colors, which right now are Madeira Rayon, into Floriani colors, you can use color play to do that. We're going to use a trick to do it. So I'm going to actually invoke color play on this. Remember, we're starting out with Madeira Rayon, and when I invoke color play, the first thing it's going to do is bring in those Madeira Rayon colors, and I'm going to want to affect all of those. Now if I make a change to this, it's going to convert these colors into Floriani first and then make the change. So if I do a darken, it's going to convert to Floriani colors, and obviously it's not a very good look, but if I do a lighten, that'll undo it. But watch what happened here to my colors. Now they're in Floriani colors. So if I say OK, they will all be converted into Floriani colors. So that's kind of a cool extra thing you can do with color play. It's probably not documented anywhere, but you learned it here. So that wraps up our section on advanced editing.